In the summer of 1518, Strasbourg wasn't just on edge, it was on the verge of a strange and deadly fever that no one could have predicted. It didn't start with war, disease, or famine, but with a woman stepping into the street and dancing. What followed was no joyful celebration. It was a terrifying, uncontrollable plague that swept hundreds into a frenzied dance of death. What possessed these people? Was it a curse, madness, or something even darker? Hold tight as we uncover one of history's most bizarre and spine-chilling mysteries, the dancing plague. Strasbourg, in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, was a city teetering on the edge in the summer of 1518. The markets bustled with farmers hawking their goods, the cathedral bells tolled with solemnity, and the tension of an uneasy population hung in the air like storm clouds over the Rhine. It was a time of scarcity, when the harvests were failing and famine and disease were constant companions. But no one in Strasbourg could have foreseen that the most surreal and deadly calamity of all was about to begin, not with the clang of swords or the clash of armies, but with the tapping of feet. On a sweltering July morning, Frau Trophäa stepped out of her home and into the cobbled streets. Neighbours saw her emerge and took little notice at first. She was an ordinary woman by all accounts, perhaps worn down by the hardships of the times. But then, without warning, she began to dance. It was not a lively, joyous jig. There was no music to accompany her movements. It was as though some unseen force had taken hold of her body. She danced slowly at first, her feet moving in a trance-like rhythm, her face expressionless. Then her motions became more frantic, her arms jerking wildly, her feet pounding the stones with increasing fervour. Passers-by stopped to stare, unsure whether to intervene or flee. They whispered among themselves, was this some kind of divine possession? Had the devil seized control of her? Hours passed, and still Frau Trophäa danced, her feet bloody from the rough cobblestones. Her husband pleaded with her to stop, but his cries fell on deaf ears. By nightfall, she had collapsed in exhaustion, only to wake the next morning and begin dancing anew. Within a week, 30 more people had joined her, caught in the same inexplicable trance. They danced in the marketplace, on bridges, and in the shadow of the cathedral. Their faces were contorted with pain, but still they could not stop. The dancing had become an epidemic. Men and women alike succumbed, their bodies twisting and turning in grotesque choreography, sometimes collapsing from sheer exhaustion, only to rise and begin again. It was as if the entire city had fallen under a spell. The authorities were at a loss. The town's council convened in a frenzy, desperate for a solution. Some believed the dancers were suffering from hot blood, a concept rooted in medieval humoral theory, which posited that an imbalance of the body's fluids could cause illness. Doctors recommended that the dancers be allowed to continue their frenzied movements, in the hope that they would dance it out and rid their bodies of the sickness. But the plan backfired. Instead of bringing relief, the music seemed to fuel the madness. More dancers joined every day, and by mid-July the numbers swelled to over 400. Some dancers laughed hysterically, their faces locked in unnatural grins, while others wept openly, their bodies betraying their minds. People began to collapse from exhaustion, dehydration, and even strokes and heart attacks. The dancing had become lethal. Whispers spread through the city. Perhaps it was divine punishment. Was this the judgment of St. Vitus, the patron saint of dancers and epileptics, exacting his wrath upon the sinful? As the plague spread, the town's religious leaders began to suspect the presence of something darker at play. They were seen as the work of supernatural forces. Demons, they whispered, had slipped into the city, exploiting the weakness of the people's faith. The bishop ordered masses to be held, exorcisms to be performed, and prayers to be said at every corner of the city. Bonfires were lit at night, their flames casting long shadows over the dancers, who continued their nightmarish routines in the flickering light. For weeks, the people of Strasbourg lived in the shadow of this madness. Families wailed as their loved ones collapsed, bodies broken from the exertion, faces pale from lack of sleep and nourishment. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. Then, just as mysteriously as it began, the plague began to wane. By the end of September, the number of dancers dwindled. One by one, they collapsed and did not rise again. Some died, Others awoke as though from a dream, unable to remember what had driven them to dance. The music stopped. The streets fell silent. In the aftermath, Strasbourg was a broken city. Families buried their dead, and the survivors returned to their lives, though they were forever changed by what they had witnessed. The council, the priests, and the doctors all offered different explanations, but none could fully explain what had transpired. Some believed it had been mass hysteria, a psychological response to the immense stress of famine, disease, and religious fear. Others clung to the belief that it was divine punishment or demonic possession. Centuries later, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most bizarre and terrifying events in European history. The records are real, the deaths were real, and yet the cause remains shrouded in mystery. In the annals of Strasbourg, it is said that on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, you can still hear the faint echo of footsteps, the ghostly reminder of a city that once danced with death.